You know that feeling when your whole world just stops? When everything you thought was solid ground suddenly turns to quicksand beneath your feet? That's exactly what happened to me when I was 16 years old. And I want to share this story with you today because sometimes the truth is stranger and more terrifying than any fiction we could imagine. My name is Emily, and this is about how my older brother Daniel's girlfriend nearly destroyed my entire family after his death, and how I had to fight alone to expose a truth that nobody wanted to believe. It started on a Tuesday in January. I remember because Tuesdays were always my favorite day of the week. Daniel and I had this tradition where we'd stay up late watching old sitcom reruns together, sharing a bowl of popcorn and laughing until our stomachs hurt. But that particular Tuesday, Daniel didn't come home. He'd been living in his own apartment across town for about 8 months, working at a tech startup and talking about finally proposing to his girlfriend, Rachel. Mom kept texting him about dinner, but the messages just sat there unread. By midnight, we were all sitting in the living room staring at our phones, that sick feeling of dread growing heavier with each passing minute. The call came at 2:30 in the morning. I remember Dad's face going completely white as he listened to whatever the police officer on the other end was saying. Mom grabbed his arm so tight her knuckles turned white, and I just sat there on the stairs in my pajamas, holding my breath because I already knew. Somehow, I already knew. They said it was suicide. An intentional overdose of sleeping medication mixed with alcohol. They found him in his apartment, peaceful looking, like he'd just decided to go to sleep and never wake up. The note they found seemed to explain everything. Talked about feeling overwhelmed, about not being ready for fatherhood, about feeling trapped by responsibilities he didn't think he could handle. It was Daniel's handwriting, or at least it looked like it at first glance. I didn't believe it. Not for one single second. Daniel was my best friend, my protector, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. He'd been excited about the baby, nervous, sure, but excited. He'd shown me the list of baby names he was considering, made me laugh with his terrible dad joke practice sessions. This was a guy who'd spent 3 hours researching the safest car seats and had already started painting what would be the nursery in his apartment. You don't do those things if you're planning to check out permanently. But grief does strange things to people, and nobody wanted to hear my doubts. Not then. The funeral was the worst day of my life up until that point. I wore Daniel's old college hoodie under my black dress because I needed to feel close to him somehow. The whole thing felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. People kept hugging me and saying things like, "He's in a better place now," and "At least he's not suffering anymore." But all I could think was that Daniel hadn't been suffering. He'd been happy. He'd been planning a future. Something was wrong with the whole situation, but every time I tried to voice that thought, adults would pat my head and tell me that denial was a normal part of grief. Rachel showed up at the funeral in this perfectly pressed black dress, her hand resting protectively on her belly, even though she was only about 18 weeks along. She looked fragile and broken, tears streaming down her face as she accepted condolences from everyone. People kept telling her how strong she was being, how Daniel would be proud of her courage. My parents wrapped her in their arms like she was already family, and I watched from a distance feeling like I was going crazy, because Rachel had never cried like that around Daniel. She'd always been so controlled, so calculated in every emotion she displayed. This performance felt off somehow, but I couldn't explain why. 3 days after we buried my brother, Rachel showed up at our front door with 2 suitcases and that same vulnerable expression. Mom invited her in without hesitation, and Dad immediately started helping with her bags. I stood at the top of the stairs watching this unfold, this sick feeling settling in my stomach like a stone. Rachel had her own apartment across town, had a good job as a marketing coordinator, had family in the area. There was no practical reason for her to move in with us. But when I tried to point this out, Mom looked at me like I'd suggested kicking a puppy. "She's carrying Daniel's baby, Emily. She's all alone and grieving just like us. This is what your brother would have wanted. We need to take care of her now." So Rachel moved into Daniel's old bedroom, the room that still smelled like his cologne and had his swim team medals hanging on the wall. Within a week, she'd rearranged everything, boxing up his belongings to make room for her maternity clothes and pregnancy books. I came home from school one day to find her wearing Daniel's favorite flannel shirt, the one he'd let me borrow whenever I was sad. When I asked if I could have it back, she smiled sweetly and said that wearing his clothes made her feel connected to him, made the baby feel close to its father. Mom overheard and actually scolded me for being selfish during such a difficult time. Rachel had this way of sliding into our family that felt almost parasitic. She started calling my parents Mom and Dad within the first week, even though she'd always used their first names when Daniel was alive. She'd curl up on the couch with Mom watching pregnancy shows, planning nursery themes, and debating baby names. She took over Daniel's spot at the dinner table without asking, drove his car because the baby deserves to be in a safe vehicle, and somehow convinced Dad to transfer my entire college fund into a trust for Daniel's child. When I protested that decision, Dad actually yelled at me for the first time in my life, told me I was being immature and selfish when a baby's future was at stake. The thing is, I wanted to be a good aunt. I wanted to love this baby and support Rachel through her grief. But something felt fundamentally wrong about the whole situation. Rachel's grief seemed performative, like she was playing a role rather than actually feeling the loss. She'd sob dramatically when my parents were around, but I'd catch her scrolling through her phone with a slight smile when she thought no one was watching. She'd talk about how much she missed Daniel, but the stories she told never quite matched up with the brother I knew. She'd say things like, "Daniel always said he wanted a big family right away," when I knew for a fact he'd told me multiple times he wanted to wait until he was 30 to have kids. She'd claim he loved country music when Daniel had literally created a playlist called Anything But Country that he'd play on road trips just to make me laugh. Small inconsistencies that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture that didn't quite fit. Whenever I tried to correct these stories, Mom would shoot me warning looks and Rachel would tear up about pregnancy brain making her confused. I learned quickly to just stay quiet. School became my only escape, but even that sanctuary was invaded when Rachel started showing up for parent-teacher conferences and school events. She'd introduce herself as Daniel's partner, practically family, and teachers who'd known me for years would give me sympathetic looks like I was the one being difficult. My best friend Jessica was the only person who seemed to understand that something was off. She'd known Daniel too, had been around our house enough to see that Rachel's version of events didn't match reality. But Jessica was careful about voicing her concerns because she didn't want to upset me during an already difficult time. The real breaking point came about 6 weeks after Rachel moved in. It was Daniel's birthday, March 23rd, and I'd been planning for weeks to go to this concert. The Killers were playing at the Civic Center downtown, and it had been Daniel's favorite band since high school. We'd had tickets for months, had been planning to go together before everything happened. I thought going to the concert and screaming the lyrics to his favorite songs would be a way to honor him, to feel close to him again. I'd even bought a new shirt with the band's logo to wear. Had been looking forward to this one night where I could process my grief in my own way. But at breakfast that morning, Rachel announced that she'd planned a gender reveal party for the same day. She'd already invited all of our extended family, rented a spot by the lake that Daniel used to love, ordered a custom cake. Everyone was expected to attend. When I mentioned that I had other plans, that I'd been looking forward to this concert for months, the temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Mom stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Dad's face turned red in that way that meant he was struggling to control his temper. And Rachel just looked at me with this expression of wounded innocence that made my skin crawl. How could you even think about missing this? Mom's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. This is about Daniel's baby, about celebrating his legacy. A concert? Really, Emily? You're going to choose loud music over your brother's child? I tried to explain that this wasn't just any concert, that Daniel and I had been planning this together, that he would have wanted me to go. But Dad cut me off with a voice I'd never heard him use before. Daniel isn't here to want anything anymore. His baby is our future, and you will be at that party. You will smile, you will celebrate, and you will stop making everything about your grief. We're all hurting, but we're choosing to focus on the blessing that's coming instead of dwelling on the past. That was the moment I realized I'd lost my parents. They'd made a choice, consciously or unconsciously, to replace the son they'd lost with the grandchild they hadn't met yet. And in doing so, they decided that my grief, my needs, my connection to Daniel didn't matter anymore. I was expected to simply move on, to embrace this new reality where Rachel played the starring role in our family drama, and I was relegated to a supporting character who better not cause any trouble. So I went to my room, closed the door, and cried until I had no tears left. Then I took a 5-hour nap because sleep was the only escape I had from the nightmare my life had become. When I woke up, something felt wrong. I had this collection of Daniel's things that I'd been keeping in a shoebox under my bed. Nothing valuable, just small items that reminded me of him. Movie ticket stubs from films we'd seen together, a keychain he'd won at the fair and given me, a bracelet he'd made in middle school that said "Best Siblings" in pony beads, photos of us at various ages, always with our arms around each other, always laughing. These items were precious to me, irreplaceable pieces of my brother that I'd been guarding carefully. But when I reached under my bed to pull out the box, it wasn't there. I tore my room apart looking for it, checked every shelf, every drawer, every possible place it could have been moved to. But the box was simply gone, vanished without a trace. At dinner that night, I asked if anyone had seen it. Rachel didn't even look up from her plate when she answered, "Oh, I donated those things. You seem to be having trouble letting go, and the pregnancy books say that holding on to physical reminders can prevent healthy grieving. I talked to your parents, and we all agreed it was for the best." My fork clattered against my plate. "You went through my personal belongings and threw away my things without asking me?" Rachel finally looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. "I didn't throw them away, sweetie. I donated them to charity. Someone else can enjoy those memories now. And besides, they were just things. Daniel wouldn't want you cluttering your life with the past when you should be focused on the future." Mom and Dad nodded in agreement, like this was perfectly reasonable behavior. Like going through my room and taking my possessions without permission was actually an act of love. I excused myself from the table and went back to my room, locked the door, and took another depression nap. Sleep had become my coping mechanism, my way of escaping a reality that had become unbearable. I was sleeping 12, sometimes 14 hours a day, missing school, barely eating. My grades were tanking, and I'd started wearing long sleeves even in warm weather to hide the way I'd started scratching at my arms when the anxiety got too bad. But nobody noticed because they were all too busy fawning over Rachel and her growing belly. The gender reveal party was exactly as awful as I'd anticipated. Rachel wore a flowing white dress that made her look angelic in the afternoon sunlight. She'd set up an elaborate display with pink and blue decorations, games for the guests, a professional photographer to capture every moment. When she cut into the cake to reveal blue frosting, everyone cheered. She pulled out a sign that said, "Connor Jr. arriving August," and I felt sick to my stomach. Our last name was Morrison, so the baby would be Connor Morrison Jr., the same name as my brother's. Sorry, Daniel Morrison Jr. She was literally trying to replace my brother with his supposed child. All through the party, relatives hugged me and said things like, "Isn't this wonderful?" And Daniel would be so happy right now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel would have hated all of this. He'd always said he'd never name a child after himself because he thought it was egotistical. He'd wanted his kids to have their own identity, not live in his shadow. This whole elaborate celebration felt more like Rachel marking her territory than honoring my brother's memory. That night, I couldn't sleep despite being exhausted. I kept thinking about Daniel, about the inconsistencies in Rachel's stories, about the way she'd so seamlessly inserted herself into our lives. Around midnight, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I went to get Daniel's laptop from where Mom had stored it in the hall closet. The police had returned it after their investigation concluded, and Mom had put it away, saying it was too painful to look at. But I needed to feel connected to my brother somehow, and looking through his computer felt like a way to hear his voice again. The laptop was password protected, but I knew Daniel's passwords. We'd always shared everything, had no secrets from each other. Or at least I'd thought we had no secrets. His desktop background was a photo of the two of us at the beach from last summer, both of us sunburned and grinning. I traced my finger over his face on the screen, whispered, "I miss you," to the empty room, and then started looking through his files. At first, everything seemed normal. Work documents, photos, music. But then I found a folder buried deep in his documents labeled "Important Stuff." Inside were screenshots that made my blood run cold. text messages between Rachel and someone saved in her phone as M work with heart emojis. Messages that were clearly romantic, clearly ongoing even after she and Daniel had gotten together. Discussions about meeting up at hotels, about being careful not to get caught, about how much longer she'd have to keep up the charade with the mark. There were more screenshots showing Rachel's location history, places she'd claimed to be that didn't match where Daniel's tracking had shown she actually was. He'd been monitoring her, documenting her lies. But the worst part was the browser history. Dozens of searches about leaving a pregnant girlfriend, paternity test while pregnant, getting out of relationship with controlling person. Daniel had been trying to figure out how to escape. He'd been researching his options, looking for a way out of a relationship that had clearly become toxic. There were journal entries too, pages and pages of them dated from the last few months of his life. Reading them felt like an invasion of privacy, but I couldn't stop. Daniel wrote about feeling trapped, about Rachel constantly bringing up his life insurance policy in weird contexts, about his morning coffee tasting bitter lately in a way it never had before, about bruises on his arms that he couldn't explain, about Rachel's mood swings that left him walking on eggshells in his own apartment. The entries got progressively more worried, more scared. My confident, steady older brother had been terrified, and he'd been documenting it all because he knew something was wrong. The last entry was dated the day before he died, and my hands shook so badly I could barely read it. If you're reading this, Ems, something bad happened. Check our spot. The letter explains everything. Our spot. I knew exactly what he meant. When we were kids and our parents would fight, Daniel and I would hide in the attic crawl space. We'd bring flashlights and snacks and make up stories to drown out the yelling. As we got older, it became our secret place to talk about serious things, to share secrets we didn't want anyone else to know. I hadn't been up there in years, but I knew exactly where it was. I waited until 3 a.m. when I was sure everyone was asleep. The house was silent except for the usual settling sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I crept up to the attic as quietly as possible, using my phone's flashlight to navigate the cluttered space. Behind the old Christmas decorations and boxes of childhood toys, there was a loose board in the wall that only Daniel and I knew about. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house as I pried the board loose. There was an envelope tucked into the space, yellowed and slightly dusty. My name was written across it in Daniel's familiar handwriting, the letters slightly shaky like his hand had been trembling when he wrote it. I sat down right there in the dusty attic and opened it, not caring about the cobwebs or the musty smell. The letter inside was 3 pages long, front and back, and reading it broke something fundamental inside me. Emily, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone and I need you to know it wasn't my choice. Rachel has been poisoning me. I know how that sounds. I know how crazy it seems, but I have proof. The baby isn't mine. I overheard her on the phone with Marcus telling him it's his, laughing about how stupid I was to believe her. She's been putting something in my morning coffee that makes me groggy and confused. I found the empty pill bottles hidden in her purse, sleeping medication that's been making me sick. I've been recording everything I can, documenting her threats, but I'm scared. She keeps talking about my life insurance policy, about how much money there is, about what she'd do if something happened to me. She's threatened to hurt herself and claim I did it if I try to leave her. I feel trapped and I don't know who to trust because she's so good at playing the victim. The letter went on to explain where he'd hidden more evidence. A USB drive in his car's spare tire compartment with audio recordings and video. A backup of his cloud storage with the password written out. Instructions for how to access his email and what to look for. He'd been building a case, gathering proof, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. And somehow, despite all his preparation, Rachel had still managed to kill him. Because that's what this was. Not suicide. Murder. I sat in that attic until dawn, reading and rereading the letter, crying until my face was swollen and my eyes burned. Part of me wanted to run downstairs and wake my parents, to shove the letter in their faces and demand they listen. But I knew they wouldn't believe me. They'd say I forged it, or that grief had made me delusional, or that I was just acting out for attention. Rachel had spent weeks building her narrative, positioning herself as the perfect grieving girlfriend while simultaneously painting me as the unstable, jealous sister. She'd laid the groundwork too well. I heard footsteps on the stairs and barely had time to shove the letter into my waistband and replace the loose board before the attic door creaked open. Rachel stood there in one of Daniel's old t-shirts that she'd turned into a nightgown, her hand resting on her belly in that protective gesture she always used. Her hair was messy like she'd just woken up, but her eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the attic methodically. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice saccharine sweet. "I've been having trouble sleeping too. The baby's been so active lately, keeps me up at night." "What are you doing up here?" I forced myself to sound casual, bored even. "Just looking for some old photo albums. Mom mentioned they were up here somewhere." Rachel walked closer, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "You know, Daniel used to tell me about this attic. Said you two would hide up here when you were little. He was always so nostalgic about your childhood together." My skin crawled at the way she said it, like she was claiming ownership of my memories, of my relationship with my brother. "Did he tell you about the hiding spot?" I asked carefully, watching her face. A flash of something, calculation maybe, crossed her features before she smiled that practiced smile. "He mentioned you had lots of little secrets, yes. Siblings are so special like that. I hope my baby has a sibling someday to share that bond with." My phone buzzed in my pocket, making both of us jump. Rachel's eyes darted to my phone, trying to see the screen, but I was faster. I grabbed it and stood up, brushing dust off my clothes. I should get some sleep before school. Big test tomorrow in chemistry. Rachel didn't move out of my way. She stood there blocking the attic stairs, studying my face like she was trying to read my thoughts. "You know, Emily, grief can make people see things that aren't there. Create conspiracy theories to make sense of loss. Your parents are really worried about you." I met her eyes, refusing to look away first. "I'm fine." Rachel's smile didn't reach her eyes, never did when it was just the two of us. "Are you?" "Because they mentioned you've been saying some concerning things, making accusations. It would be really sad if you had a breakdown and needed to go somewhere for help. Somewhere quiet where you could focus on getting better." The threat was clear as day. She was warning me that if I spoke up, she'd have me committed, locked away somewhere under the guise of mental health treatment. I pushed past her without responding, my heart racing as I hurried back to my room. Once my door was locked, I checked my phone with shaking hands. The text was from Jessica using a number I didn't recognize. "My sister Alicia works at the pharmacy at County General. She saw Rachel filling a prescription for sleeping pills 2 days before Daniel died. The prescription was in Daniel's name, but he'd never picked it up there before. Alicia thought it was weird enough to remember. We need to talk. Meet me before first period tomorrow." I barely slept the rest of that night. Every creak of the house made me jump, convinced Rachel was coming back. I kept the letter hidden inside an empty tampon box in my bathroom, figuring that was the one place she'd never search. But I couldn't stop thinking about everything I'd discovered. My brother hadn't wanted to die. He'd been trying to escape, trying to save himself, and Rachel had killed him. She'd poisoned him, staged it to look like suicide, and then moved in with his grieving family to play the role of devastated girlfriend while she waited for the insurance money to come through. The next morning at breakfast, my parents announced that they'd made an appointment for family therapy. Rachel had suggested it, concerned about how I was handling my grief. The therapist, Dr. Catherine Mills, was apparently wonderful. Rachel had already met with her privately and explained our family situation. Of course she had. Rachel was systematically isolating me, cutting off any support system I might have, positioning herself as the reasonable one while painting me as unstable. "I have school," I protested weakly, knowing it wouldn't matter. "Your mom already called the principal," Dad said firmly. "This is more important than 1 day of classes. Dr. Mills had an opening this morning and we need to take it. We're all going to go, work through this as a family, and start healing properly." Rachel reached across the table and patted my hand. "It's going to be okay, sweetie. Therapy really helps. I've been going for years." I bet she had. At school, I was only there for about 20 minutes before the intercom crackled to life. "Emily Morrison, please report to Principal Anderson's office immediately." The hallway went quiet, everyone staring at me as I gathered my books and walked to the office. I could feel their eyes on my back, could hear the whispered speculations. Principal Anderson was sitting behind his desk with Mrs. Chen, the school counselor, beside him. They both had these concerned, pitying expressions that made me want to scream. "Emily, have a seat, please." Principal Anderson gestured to the chair across from his desk. "We received a concerning call from your family this morning. They're worried about your mental health, about some fixations you've been having regarding your brother's death." Mrs. Chen leaned forward with practiced empathy. "Your stepmother Rachel mentioned you've been making accusations, creating conspiracy theories. We want to help you process your grief in a healthy way." "Emily, she's not my stepmother," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's my brother's girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, technically. They exchanged one of those adult looks, the kind that says they think they know better than you do." "Regardless of labels," Principal Anderson said, "we're implementing some new protocols for you. You'll be checking in with Mrs. Chen daily. We want to monitor your emotional state, make sure you're getting the support you need. And if there are any more incidents, any more concerning behavior, we'll need to involve additional resources." The message was clear. Keep quiet, stop asking questions, or face consequences. They'd been primed by Rachel to view me as unstable, and anything I said would be filtered through that lens. After the meeting, I found Jessica waiting by my locker. She grabbed my arm and pulled me into the empty band room, checking to make sure no one had followed us. "Okay, this is seriously messed up." My sister Alicia pulled the pharmacy records. Rachel filled Daniel's prescription for Ambien, 30 pills, 2 days before he died. The prescription was months old, something Daniel had gotten after a work stress thing, but he'd never filled it. Rachel must have found the script somehow and used it. She paid cash so there wouldn't be a paper trail on her credit card. I pulled out my phone and showed Jessica a photo I'd taken of one of Daniel's journal entries. Jessica's eyes widened as she read about the bitter coffee, the unexplained grogginess, the way Rachel kept bringing up life insurance. "This is evidence of murder," she breathed. "Emily, we need to go to the police." I shook my head. "It's not enough. It's circumstantial. Rachel's built this perfect narrative where I'm the unstable teenager who can't handle grief. If I go to the police now with just this, she'll twist it. Say I faked the journal entries, that I'm having delusions. We need more proof, something undeniable." The family therapy session that afternoon was a nightmare. Dr. Mills had an office in one of those professional buildings that tried too hard to be calming. Soft colors, abstract art, a fountain burbling in the corner. She was maybe 45, perfectly styled blonde hair, designer clothes, the kind of person who looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. When we walked in, she greeted Rachel like an old friend, hugging her and asking about the baby. My parents, she shook hands with professionally. Me, she looked at with clinical assessment, like I was a specimen to be studied. "Let's all get comfortable," Dr. Mills said, gesturing to the arranged chairs. "Rachel, why don't you start by sharing what's been concerning you?" And so it began. Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly brought for the purpose and launched into a rehearsed speech about how worried she was about me. How I'd been saying terrible things about her, making wild accusations about her hurting Daniel. How I seemed to resent the baby, to be jealous of the attention it was getting. How she was scared sometimes when I looked at her with such anger in my eyes. It was a masterful performance. Just the right amount of tears, just the right tremor in her voice. She even threw in details that made me sound absolutely unhinged, claiming I'd threatened to hurt her and the baby if she didn't leave our house. My parents' faces grew more alarmed with each word. Dr. Mills took notes, nodding sympathetically. "Emily," Dr. Mills turned to me once Rachel had finished. "These are some very serious accusations Rachel is sharing. Do you want to respond?" I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd lose my temper, if I'd prove Rachel right. I forced myself to speak calmly. I never threatened anyone. And I'm not jealous of the baby. I'm grieving my brother, and some of Rachel's stories about him don't match the person I knew. That's not making accusations. That's just noticing inconsistencies. Dr. Mills made more notes. It's very common in grief to experience what we call cognitive dissonance. Our memories of loved ones can conflict with others' experiences because we all knew different sides of that person. What seems like inconsistencies to you might simply be aspects of Daniel you weren't aware of. She'd already decided I was wrong before I'd even spoken. I could see it in the way she'd positioned herself, physically closer to Rachel, nodding along with her points while looking skeptical of mine. The session continued in the same vein. Every concern I raised was reframed as a symptom of complicated grief. Every defensive word I spoke was used as evidence of my instability. By the end of the hour, Dr. Mills had concluded that I was experiencing something called delusional thinking brought on by my inability to accept Daniel's death. She recommended continued therapy, possibly medication, and close monitoring at home and school. Rachel smiled and thanked her for her insight. My parents looked relieved to have a professional opinion confirming Rachel's concerns, and I felt more alone than ever. That night, Rachel created a shared family calendar on all our phones. My entire life was scheduled. School from 8 to 3, supervised study time from 3:30 to 6, family dinner at 6:30, free time but only in common areas where I could be watched, from 7 to 9, bed by 9:30 with phone collected at the door. Every minute accounted for, every movement tracked. For your safety, Rachel explained sweetly to my parents. So we always know where you are in case you need help, in case you have another episode. When Jessica tried to come over that weekend, Rachel answered the door before I even knew she was there. I'm so sorry, but Emily isn't allowed to have visitors right now, Rachel said in that sugar-sweet voice she used with people she was manipulating. She's been having some mental health challenges, and her therapist thinks socializing with people who enable her fixations would be harmful to her recovery. What fixations? Jessica demanded, trying to see past Rachel into the house. She knows I'm here, right? My parents materialized behind Rachel like they'd been waiting for this. Please respect our family's privacy during this difficult time, Mom said firmly. Emily needs space and time to work through her grief in healthy ways. When she's ready for visitors, we'll let you know. I watched from my bedroom window as Jessica walked back to her car, her shoulders tight with frustration. My phone buzzed with a text from yet another number I didn't recognize. Midnight. Old playground on Maple Street. Bring anything you found. We're going to figure this out. Come alone. Jay. The next week was suffocating. Between school, mandatory check-ins with Mrs. Chen, family therapy sessions, and Rachel's constant surveillance, I had virtually no freedom. But I was documenting everything. Every inconsistency in Rachel's stories. Every time she said Daniel told her something I knew wasn't true. Every moment her mask slipped and I saw the cold calculation beneath. I was building my own case, just like Daniel had done. Mrs. Chen meant well, I think. But she'd been primed by Rachel's narrative and viewed everything I said through that filter. During one of our sessions, she gently brought up some concerning messages I'd allegedly sent Rachel. Threatening texts about hurting her and the baby if she didn't leave. I'd never sent them, of course. The screenshots were obvious fakes if you looked closely. The font was slightly wrong. The timestamps didn't match when I'd been in class or asleep. But Mrs. Chen didn't look that closely. She just saw what she expected to see. I need you to understand how serious this is, Emily, she said softly. Threatening messages, even if you don't mean them, are taken very seriously. I'm required to report these concerns. I'm giving you a chance to talk about what's happening before it escalates further. I didn't send those, I said flatly. Someone faked them. Mrs. Chen sighed, making a note in her file. Denial is also concerning behavior. Rachel says you've been accusing her of manipulating things, of lying about Daniel. But everyone else sees a grieving young woman trying her best to honor your brother's memory while preparing for his child. That night, I snuck out of my bedroom window for the first time in my life. My room was on the second floor, but there was a trellis that Daniel had taught me to climb years ago when we'd had adventures we didn't want our parents knowing about. The old playground on Maple Street had been abandoned for years, too run down for the city to maintain, but not dangerous enough to demolish. Jessica was already there, sitting on a rusted swing with another girl I didn't recognize at first. Alicia, Jessica's older sister, stepped into the light from the street lamp. I brought copies of everything from the pharmacy. We need to document this properly. For the next 2 hours, we went through every piece of evidence. I showed them photos of Daniel's journal entries, the bruises he'd documented on his arms with dates and descriptions, the entries about Rachel's threats, about feeling trapped, about her constant talk of his life insurance policy. Alicia added the pharmacy records, highlighting the suspicious timing of the sleeping pill prescription. Jessica had been doing her own digging, finding inconsistencies in Rachel's social media, posts she'd deleted, but Jessica had cached earlier. Look at this. Jessica pulled up a screenshot from Rachel's Instagram from 2 months before Daniel died. She'd posted a quote about knowing your worth and not settling for less than you deserve. The comments were full of her friends encouraging her to dump him and find someone better. That doesn't sound like a woman madly in love and excited to have a baby with her boyfriend. Alicia was taking photos of everything with her phone, uploading to multiple cloud accounts as we worked. If something happens to one of you, this information needs to survive. She was practical like that, thinking about worst-case scenarios. We're dealing with someone who's potentially killed at least once. We need to be smart about this. I showed them the letter Daniel had written, and both of them went quiet. This is evidence of premeditation, Alicia whispered. He knew she was going to kill him and was trying to protect himself. We need that USB drive from his car, Jessica said. Do your parents still have his vehicle? They gave it to Rachel, I admitted, feeling sick. Said the baby needed a safe car to ride in. Of course they did. Alicia rubbed her temples. Okay, we need to think strategically. Going to the police right now probably won't work. Rachel's built too solid a narrative. But if we can find more evidence, build an undeniable case, they'll have to listen. As I climbed back through my window at 3 a.m, I felt hope for the first time since Daniel died. I wasn't alone anymore. Someone believed me, was helping me fight back. But I also felt afraid because Alicia was right. We were dealing with someone who had killed and gotten away with it. Someone who was smart enough, calculating enough to fool everyone. Rachel was dangerous, and now she knew I suspected her. The next morning, everything exploded. I came downstairs for breakfast to find my parents and Rachel sitting at the table with grim expressions. On the table between them was my phone, the one I'd thought was safely locked in my room. Rachel had clearly gone through my messages, had seen my communications with Jessica and Alicia. Her face was a mask of hurt and betrayal, but her eyes were cold and triumphant. Emily, sit down. Dad's voice was harder than I'd ever heard it. We need to talk about this conspiracy you've been cooking up with your friends. These allegations, these wild theories. Rachel has shown us some very disturbing messages. Mom pushed my phone across the table toward me. The screen showed a fabricated message thread where I'd supposedly been planning to hurt Rachel, detailing ways to make it look like an accident. The messages used my number, came from my account, but I'd never written them. Rachel had somehow gained access to my accounts and created fake evidence. Those aren't real, I said desperately. I never wrote those messages. She's framing me. Can't you see what she's doing? She fakes evidence, manipulates people, and you're falling for it just like she planned. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, perfect crystal drops that rolled down her cheeks. I'm scared, she whispered to my parents. I think she might actually try to hurt me. Maybe we should call the police. No, Mom said quickly. No police. She's not well. She doesn't understand what she's saying. Emily, honey, you're going to stay home from school for a few days. We're getting you help. Real help. What does that mean? I backed toward the door, my heart pounding. There's a facility about an hour from here, Dad explained, his voice gentler now. It's for teens struggling with trauma and mental health crises. Dr. Mills thinks it would be beneficial for you to spend some time there. A few weeks, maybe a month. Just until you're feeling more stable. They were trying to have me committed. Rachel had manipulated them so thoroughly that they were willing to lock me away to protect her. I ran. Just bolted out the front door and kept running. No destination in mind. Just pure panic driving my legs. I heard Dad calling after me, but I didn't stop. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, finally collapsing on a bench in a park several miles from home. My phone was still back at the house, so I couldn't call anyone. I sat there trying to catch my breath, trying to figure out what to do next. A woman walking her dog gave me a concerned look, and I realized I was crying. Had been crying the whole time I was running. "Pull yourself together," I told myself. "Daniel needs you to be strong." He gathered evidence knowing this might happen. "You have to finish what he started." I walked to Jessica's house, arriving on her doorstep disheveled and exhausted. Her mom, Mrs. Rivera, took one look at me and pulled me inside, wrapping me in a hug and making me sit down while she made hot chocolate. Jessica must have filled her mother in on some of what was happening because Mrs. Rivera didn't seem surprised by my appearance or my story. "Your parents called here about an hour ago," she said gently. "They're very worried about you." "Do they have reason to be worried?" "About me running away, yes. About me being unstable or dangerous, no. I'm being framed by my brother's killer and nobody will listen." Mrs. Rivera studied my face for a long moment. "My daughter believes you. Alicia believes you. And I've raised smart girls who don't throw around accusations of murder lightly. So I'm going to listen to your full story. All of it. And then we're going to figure out how to handle this properly." So I told her everything. The journal entries, the letter, the pharmacy records, Rachel's inconsistent stories, the fake messages. Mrs. Rivera listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "This Rachel," she said finally, "sounds like someone I prosecuted about 8 years ago. Different name, different victim, but the same pattern. Young woman targets men with money, gets pregnant or claims to be pregnant, isolates them from support systems, and then things end badly for the victim. What happened to her?" I asked. "The case fell apart. Not enough evidence to prove intent, and she was very good at playing the victim. Last I heard, she'd left the state with a new identity. Mrs. Rivera was a former district attorney, had worked in the prosecutor's office for 15 years before retiring to teach law at the community college. If anyone would recognize a pattern of predatory behavior, it would be her." "Do you still have contacts in the DA's office?" Jessica asked her mother. "People who might be willing to look into this?" "I do. And I think it's time we reached out to them." The next few days were a blur of activity. Mrs. Rivera reached out to her old colleagues, sending them the evidence we'd compiled. She helped me get a lawyer, someone young and hungry who specialized in advocating for teens in bad situations. His name was David Chen. He was maybe 30, and he listened to my story with the same serious attention Mrs. Rivera had shown. "We need more direct evidence," he said after reviewing everything. "What you have is compelling, but still largely circumstantial. Is there any way to access that USB drive your brother mentioned?" "Rachel has his car," I explained. "And she knows I'm suspicious now. There's no way she'll let me anywhere near it." "What about the police?" Mrs. Rivera asked. "The ones who investigated Daniel's death. Would they reopen the case if presented with new evidence?" David shook his head. "Not without something more concrete. A letter saying he was scared, pharmacy records, journal entries. These all paint a concerning picture, but they don't prove murder. We need something that directly links Rachel to the act itself, that something came from an unexpected source." A guy named Tyler, who'd worked with Daniel at the tech startup, showed up at Jessica's house looking for me. He'd heard through mutual friends that I was asking questions about Rachel, and he had something he needed to share. The week before Daniel died, Rachel showed up at our office making a huge scene. She was crying, claiming Daniel had been abusing her, showing bruises on her arms and saying she was afraid for her life and the baby. It was really convincing. Everyone was horrified. Daniel got pulled into HR. There was a whole thing. But here's the weird part. Tyler pulled out his phone. I was on break in the parking lot afterward, and I saw Rachel in her car. She was laughing, like really laughing, taking selfies and posing. I thought it was so strange that I actually recorded a few seconds of it. He showed me the video. There was Rachel, sitting in her car, her face completely different from the devastated woman she'd been minutes before in the office. She was grinning, adjusting her hair, taking photos with her phone. At one point, she actually laughed and did a little victory gesture. "Did you show this to anyone?" David asked, his eyes fixed on the video. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. "No, I didn't want to get involved in relationship drama." And then Daniel died and I felt terrible. Like maybe I should have said something. But everyone was saying it was suicide and I didn't know if this video meant anything. "It means Rachel was faking abuse allegations," I said. "Which means she was setting up her narrative early, making people think Daniel was violent, so if he died, it would seem plausible he'd taken his own life out of guilt." David copied the video to his phone. "This is good. Combined with everything else, this starts to show a pattern of manipulation. We need more sources, though. Anyone else who interacted with Rachel, who might have seen something off." Over the next week, we found them. Daniel's neighbor, who'd heard loud arguments but always heard Rachel's voice doing the yelling. Never Daniel's. A waitress at a restaurant where they'd eaten frequently, who'd seen Rachel slip something into Daniel's drink when he went to the bathroom. A friend of Rachel's who'd been cut off after asking too many questions about the pregnancy timeline. Each person added another piece to the puzzle. Marcus, the man Rachel had been having an affair with, was the hardest to track down. But Jessica found him through social media sleuthing, and he agreed to meet with us at a coffee shop 3 towns over. He was 28, worked as a financial advisor, and was terrified of Rachel. "She told me the baby was mine," he admitted, stirring his coffee nervously. "Said Daniel was just her cover, that we were going to run away together once she got her hands on his money. She had this whole plan worked out. I was stupid enough to believe her at first." "What changed?" Mrs. Rivera asked gently. She started talking about Daniel's life insurance policy, about how much money there was, about how it would set us up for life. I told her I wasn't interested in blood money, that if she wanted to be with me, she needed to just leave him honestly. She got really angry, said I didn't understand what she'd already put into this plan, how much work she'd done. That's when I realized she wasn't trying to leave Daniel. She was trying to inherit from him. Did she ever explicitly say she was planning to kill him? David leaned forward. Not directly, but she said things like, "Problems have solutions, and people die all the time in accidents." When I tried to break things off with her completely, she threatened to tell Daniel everything, to ruin both our lives. I was trapped just like he was. Marcus had text messages, proof of their affair, proof that Rachel had admitted the baby might not be Daniel's. She'd been playing both of them, keeping Marcus on the hook as a backup plan while working her primary con on Daniel and his family. With all this evidence compiled, David felt confident enough to approach the police. But when we went to the detective who'd handled Daniel's case, the reception was colder than we'd expected. Detective Harrison was maybe 50, looked tired, and clearly didn't want to hear that he'd called a murder a suicide. "Listen, I understand you're grieving," he said to me. "And sometimes grief makes us look for answers, for someone to blame. But your brother left a note. The handwriting matched. The circumstances all pointed to suicide. There was no evidence of foul play. My parents had the note, I know. But did you have a handwriting expert analyze it? Or did you just compare it to his signature on file? Did you test the pills found in his system to see if the dosage matched what he would have taken voluntarily? Did you check for defensive wounds, for any signs of struggle?" Detective Harrison's expression hardened. "We did our job, young lady, and I don't appreciate you implying we didn't. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual active cases to work on." David tried to intervene, presenting the evidence we'd gathered, but Harrison barely glanced at it. Inconsistencies in a girlfriend's stories don't prove murder. People grieve differently, remember things differently. And affair doesn't equal murder. I need evidence, not speculation. We left the police station feeling defeated. Rachel had won. She'd convinced everyone, from my parents to Daniel's employer to the police themselves, that she was the victim here. No one wanted to believe that the sweet, pregnant girlfriend could be a calculated killer. But Mrs. Rivera wasn't done fighting. If local police won't listen, we go higher. She knew someone at the state attorney general's office, someone who specialized in complex fraud and murder cases. It took a week to get the meeting, but finally we sat down with Assistant Attorney General Patricia Williams. She was maybe 40, sharp-eyed, and she actually listened. More importantly, she saw the pattern. "This is the third case like this that's crossed my desk in 5 years," she said after reviewing our evidence. "Different names, different states, but the same methodology. I think we're dealing with a serial predator, possibly a serial killer." Patricia explained that there had been 2 other cases with similar patterns: young men dying in apparent suicides or accidents, pregnant girlfriends who moved in with families and then disappeared with insurance payouts before too many questions could be asked. The cases had never been connected because they were in different jurisdictions, different names, but the pattern was identical. "Can you reopen Daniel's case?" I asked desperately. "With the Attorney General's backing, yes. And we can coordinate with the other jurisdictions, possibly build a RICO case if we can prove this was an ongoing criminal enterprise." While Patricia worked on the legal side, I had to deal with the reality of my home situation. My parents were still convinced I needed psychiatric help. Rachel was still living in our house, still playing the perfect grieving girlfriend. And I was still being watched constantly, my every movement monitored and reported. But I had something now that I hadn't had before: hope. And a team of people who believed me. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, our elderly neighbor who'd been friendly with Daniel, came to Jessica's house looking for me. She'd been carrying guilt for weeks about something she'd seen. The night Daniel died, she explained, Rachel came to my house around midnight saying she needed to borrow my car for an emergency. Said her car wouldn't start and she needed to check on Daniel, who wasn't answering his phone. I lent her my Honda without question. She brought it back 3 hours later with mud all over the tires. 3 hours was plenty of time to drive to Daniel's apartment and back, and mud would match the dirt road leading to his complex. "Did you tell the police this?" Mrs. Rivera asked. "No," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I didn't think anything of it at the time. Rachel said Daniel had been fine, just had his phone off. It wasn't until later, after he died, that I thought maybe I should have mentioned it. But by then, the case was closed, and I didn't want to cause trouble for that poor pregnant girl." "That poor pregnant girl killed my brother," I said, my voice breaking. "And she used your car to do it so her own vehicle wouldn't be tracked to his apartment that night." Mrs. Chen started crying. "I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd said something sooner." "You're saying something now," Mrs. Rivera reassured her. "And your testimony could be the piece that breaks this case wide open." Patricia immediately went to work with Mrs. Chen's statement. A judge granted a warrant to examine my parents' security camera footage from that night. Footage Rachel had convinced them to install for safety, but which she probably thought had been deleted by now. The cameras had cloud backup, though, something Rachel apparently hadn't known about. The footage was damning. It showed Rachel leaving the house at midnight, exactly as Mrs. Chen had said. She looked alert, purposeful, not like someone responding to an emergency, but like someone executing a plan. She returned at 3:15 in the morning, checked to make sure no one was watching, and slipped back inside. The timestamp matched perfectly with the estimated time of Daniel's death. Combined with the pharmacy records showing she'd picked up his sleeping pills, Marcus's testimony about her plotting, and Daniel's own documented fears, Patricia had enough to arrest Rachel. The arrest happened on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 months after Daniel's death. Police showed up at our house with a warrant, and I watched from the stairs as they read Rachel her rights. She tried one last manipulation, clutching her belly and crying about the stress on the baby, about how she was being persecuted. But the officers weren't swayed. They'd been briefed on her history of using pregnancy as a sympathy tactic. As they led her out in handcuffs, she looked right at me. Her mask finally dropped completely. No more sweet smiles or fake tears. Just cold rage. "This isn't over," she mouthed. But it was over. At least this part of it. My parents stood in the doorway looking shell-shocked. We thought. Mom started but couldn't finish. Dad just sank into a chair, his head in his hands. They'd invited a killer into our home, given her Daniel's things, transferred money into accounts she controlled, and almost had me committed to protect her. The guilt on their faces was almost painful to see. The news coverage was intense. Local woman arrested in death of boyfriend. More victims suspected. Reporters camped outside our house for days. Rachel's face was everywhere, with her fake sweet smile in some photos and her real cold expression in others. Patricia called me a few days after the arrest. We've connected her to 4 other suspicious deaths across 3 states. This goes back at least a decade. Your brother wasn't her first victim, Emily, but thanks to his foresight in documenting everything, he helped us make sure he's her last. The names kept coming. Jeremy Walsh in Oregon 5 years ago. Marcus Thompson in Nevada 7 years before that. Each one a young man with money, with life insurance, with families too grief-stricken to ask hard questions. Rachel had been doing this as a career, moving from state to state, identity to identity, leaving devastation in her wake. One of the victims' mothers reached out to me directly. Her name was Patricia Thompson, and her son Marcus had been Rachel's victim 7 years ago. "Thank you," she wrote in her email. "Thank you for being strong enough to fight when everyone told you to stop. Thank you for believing in your brother when it would have been easier to accept the lie. My son left me a letter too, hidden where he thought I'd eventually find it. But I found it too late, after his case was closed, after everyone had moved on. I tried to make noise about it, but no one listened. You made them listen. The trial wouldn't happen for at least a year, maybe more. Rachel's lawyers were already building her defense, claiming she was a victim of circumstance being railroaded by a justice system looking for a scapegoat. But Patricia was confident. We have evidence from multiple deaths, multiple identities, a clear pattern of predatory behavior. Unless she takes a plea deal, which her ego probably won't let her do, she's going away for a very long time. The hardest part was dealing with my parents' guilt. They apologized over and over, but sorry didn't undo the months I'd spent being gaslit and isolated. Sorry didn't bring Daniel back. We started actual family therapy, not with Dr. Mills, who'd lost her license after it came out. She'd never actually examined me properly, but with someone legitimate who specialized in family trauma. "It's going to take time," the new therapist said during one session. "Trust, once broken this badly, doesn't repair quickly. Emily has been traumatized not just by losing her brother, but by having her entire support system turn against her when she needed them most. You'll need to earn back that trust through consistent action, not just words. Dad sold Daniel's car and used the money to restore my college fund, adding more to account for everything he'd transferred to Rachel. Mom went through the house and collected every single item Rachel had touched, donating or disposing of all of it. They gave me Daniel's room, let me set it up however I wanted as a space that was entirely mine. Small gestures, but they mattered. Jessica's family essentially adopted me during the recovery period. I spent more time at their house than my own for months. Mrs. Rivera helped me apply to colleges, went with me on campus tours, treated me like the daughter she'd always wanted. Alicia taught me self-defense, practical skills for feeling safe in the world again. Jessica was just there, constant and unwavering, exactly what I needed. The local news wanted to interview me, but Mrs. Rivera advised against it. Let the story be about the victims, not about you. Your brother deserves to have his memory honored properly, not turned into a media circus. So I stayed quiet publicly, but I started writing privately. Blog posts and articles about recognizing manipulation, about trusting your instincts, about how predators count on social politeness and people's reluctance to believe bad things about seemingly nice people. One post went viral after being shared by Patricia Thompson. It was titled, "When Everyone Calls You Crazy, But You Know You're Right." In it, I detailed the warning signs I'd noticed, the ways Rachel had isolated and manipulated not just Daniel, but our entire family. Thousands of people commented with their own stories of being gaslit, of knowing something was wrong but being told they were overreacting. The post resonated because, unfortunately, my experience wasn't unique. Other families reached out, families who'd lost someone in suspicious circumstances but had been told it was suicide or an accident. Not all of them were Rachel's victims, but many had similar patterns. Partners or family members who'd benefited financially from the death, who'd seemed more calculating than grieving, who'd moved on suspiciously fast. I started collecting these stories, building a database that Patricia's office could use to identify potential cases worth reopening. 6 months after Rachel's arrest, I testified before the grand jury. It was terrifying, sitting in that formal room with lawyers and jurors all staring at me. But I thought about Daniel. about how he'd documented everything, knowing I might need to do exactly this. I told them about the letter, the journal entries, the way Rachel had systematically isolated him and then me. When I finished, the room was silent. Then the forewoman of the jury thanked me for my courage. The grand jury voted to indict Rachel on 4 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of fraud, and conspiracy charges. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about all her victims. Rachel's true identity turned out to be Jennifer Walsh, originally from Idaho. She'd started her criminal career in her early 20s with insurance scams, gradually escalating to murder as she realized how easy it was to manipulate grieving families. Her first victim had been a boyfriend in college, ruled an accidental drowning. No one had questioned it because Jennifer had been so devastated, such a convincing grief. That success had taught her that women, especially pregnant women, got the benefit of the doubt in ways that made them nearly untouchable as suspects. The trial, when it finally happened 18 months after her arrest, was massive. Media from across the country covered it. Families of all her confirmed victims attended, sitting together in a section Patricia had arranged for us. I sat between my parents and Mrs. Thompson, and we held hands through the worst testimony. The defense tried every trick they had, claimed Rachel had been abused herself, that she was mentally ill, that the evidence was circumstantial. But Patricia had built an airtight case. 12 jurors in 3 states, 4 victims, financial records showing clear patterns, testimony from dozens of witnesses who'd seen Rachel's mask slip. The moment they played Daniel's audio recordings in court, I cried. There was his voice, strong and clear, documenting the dates Rachel had drugged his coffee, the threats she'd made, his fear for his safety. She threatened to say I hit her if I break up with her, Daniel's recorded voice explained. She's shown me how she gives herself bruises in places that look like someone grabbed her. I'm scared of what she'll do if I try to leave. Rachel, sitting at the defense table in a conservative dress with minimal makeup trying to look innocent, finally lost her composure. She stood up and screamed that Daniel had been weak, that he'd deserved what happened, that all her victims had been pathetic men who didn't appreciate what she'd given them. Her lawyers tried to quiet her, but the damage was done. The jury had seen behind the mask. The verdict came back in 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. When the forewoman read the decision, I felt Daniel's presence somehow, like he was there watching justice finally being served. The sentencing hearing was 3 weeks later. Rachel got 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. She'd die in prison, would never manipulate or hurt anyone again. As they let her out, she looked at me one last time. No words, just a long stare that was meant to intimidate. I stared right back, refusing to look away. I'd won. Daniel had won. She'd taken his life, but she hadn't taken his truth. After the trial, I could finally breathe. The weight I'd been carrying for almost 2 years lifted. I'd graduated high school during the trial process, attending classes and court dates and therapy sessions while trying to maintain some semblance of normal teenage life. Now, with Rachel behind bars and justice served, I could start thinking about my own future. I chose to attend a university about 3 hours from home, close enough to visit family, but far enough to establish my own identity. Engineering, like Daniel had always said I'd excel at. Every time I struggled with a difficult problem set, I'd hear his voice encouraging me, reminding me I was smart enough to figure it out. My parents and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. They'd violated my trust so deeply that it took years to fully repair. But we worked at it. Family therapy, honest conversations, them taking accountability for choosing to believe Rachel over me. There were setbacks and arguments, times when I wanted to give up, but ultimately we found our way back to each other. They'd made terrible choices, but they'd done so as grief-stricken parents manipulated by a master predator. That didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me understand them. The anniversary of Daniel's death is still hard. Every January, I visit his grave and tell him about my life, about classes and friends and the future I'm building. I wear the friendship bracelet Mom saved, the one Rachel had tried to throw away. Sometimes I play his favorite songs and cry, letting myself feel the full weight of missing him. Other times I laugh, remembering funny moments we shared, inside jokes no one else would understand. Grief is like that. I've learned. It doesn't disappear, but it changes, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. I speak sometimes at victim advocacy events, sharing my story to help others recognize manipulation and trust their instincts. The response is always overwhelming, people coming up afterward to share their own experiences of being gaslit, of knowing something was wrong but being told they were crazy. If my story helps even one person escape a dangerous situation or investigate a suspicious death, then maybe some meaning can be found in all this tragedy. Jessica and I are still best friends, closer than ever after everything we went through together. She's studying criminal justice now, inspired by our experience to help other victims. We talk about maybe starting a nonprofit someday, an organization that helps families investigate suspicious deaths when police are too quick to close cases. Mrs. Rivera has offered to help us set it up once we graduate. Alicia works as a forensic pharmacist, using her expertise to identify poisoning cases that might otherwise go unnoticed. The other victim families have become extended family in a strange way. We stay in touch, check in on anniversaries, support each other through the ongoing trauma of having lost loved ones to a predator. Mrs. Thompson and I talk on the phone weekly. She's become like a second mother, understanding my experience in ways no one else can. We've started a scholarship fund in our sons' names for teens who've lost siblings to violence or murder. Marcus struggled with guilt for years, feeling responsible for not stopping Rachel when he had the chance. But he's in therapy now, working through his trauma, and he volunteers with an organization that helps abuse victims recognize manipulation tactics. He sends me updates sometimes, sharing how speaking about his experience has helped others escape dangerous situations. It doesn't undo what happened, but it transforms the pain into something useful. I still have hard days. Days when I see something that reminds me of Daniel and the grief hits like a tidal wave. Days when I second-guess every decision, wondering if I could have saved him if I'd acted faster or smarter. My therapist reminds me that I was 16 years old, isolated and unsupported, fighting against an experienced predator and an entire system designed to dismiss young people's concerns. That I did save people by refusing to stay quiet, by fighting for truth when everyone else had accepted lies. The hardest moments are seeing families that remind me of what I've lost. Brothers and sisters joking around, young men teaching their younger siblings to drive, families intact and unbroken. I'm happy for them, but there's always that ache, that knowledge of what could have been if Rachel hadn't stolen Daniel's future. He would have been an amazing father, would have been there for every milestone in my life, would have grown into the kind of man who made the world better just by being in it. But I try to live in a way that honors his memory. I speak up when I see injustice. I trust my instincts even when others doubt me. I refuse to let politeness or social pressure keep me silent when something is wrong. Daniel taught me to be brave, to think critically, to protect the people I love. His death taught me that I'm stronger than I ever knew I could be. Both lessons shaped me into who I am today. 5 years after Daniel's death, I'm graduating college with a degree in biomedical engineering. My parents are there, proud and supportive, having fully acknowledged their failures and worked to make amends. Jessica and her family are there, the support system that saved my life. And I feel Daniel there too, in the way the sun breaks through the clouds during the ceremony, in the feeling of accomplishment and hope for the future. I'm building the life he wanted for me, the life he tried to protect by documenting the truth even in his darkest moments. I've learned that justice doesn't always look like we expect it to. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it requires fighting battles that seem impossible. Sometimes you have to stand alone against everyone you love and trust when you know they're wrong. But truth has a way of surfacing eventually if someone is brave enough to keep digging, to keep asking questions, to refuse the comfortable lie in favor of the difficult truth. Daniel was that brave. He documented his own murder, left me a roadmap to justice, believed I was strong enough to follow it even when I didn't believe in myself. This story, our story, has a lesson that I hope resonates with anyone listening. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Don't let social pressure or others' disbelief make you doubt your own perception. Pay attention to inconsistencies, to patterns, to the mask slipping. Predators rely on people's reluctance to believe that someone who seems nice could be dangerous. They weaponize social conventions, politeness, Benefit of the doubt. Fighting back requires being willing to look rude, paranoid, difficult. It requires believing in yourself when everyone else says you're wrong. If you're in a situation where you know something is wrong but no one will listen, document everything. Keep records, take screenshots, write down dates and details. Build your case methodically. Find allies, even if it's just one person who believes you. Don't let isolation make you doubt your sanity. And if you're supporting someone who's raising concerns about abuse or manipulation, listen. Really listen, even if their story seems far-fetched. The most dangerous predators are the ones who don't fit our mental image of what danger looks like. I think about the teenage girl I was, standing at my brother's grave, absolutely certain that something was wrong despite everyone telling me to accept his death and move on. She was scared and isolated and had no idea how to prove what she knew in her heart. But she trusted herself enough to keep fighting, to keep looking for truth even when it would have been easier to accept the lie. I'm proud of that girl. She saved lives by refusing to stay silent. She honored her brother by believing in him when the world had decided he'd simply given up. Daniel's story could have ended with Rachel getting away with murder, moving on to her next victim, leaving a trail of devastated families in her wake. Instead, it ended with justice, with a predator in prison for life, with potential future victims saved. Not because the system worked. The system failed repeatedly. But because one teenage girl loved her brother enough to fight for his truth, even when that fight nearly destroyed her. So, I'm sharing this story not just as a memorial to Daniel, but as a call to action. Listen to your loved ones when they say something is wrong. Believe young people when they report concerns. Question narratives that seem too perfect, too convenient. Don't let politeness or social pressure keep you from asking hard questions. And if you're the one who knows something is wrong, trust yourself. Your instincts exist for a reason. Your doubts are valid. Your fight for truth matters. Daniel can't tell his own story anymore, so I tell it for him. I share what he documented, what he wanted the world to know, what he hoped would prevent others from experiencing what he went through. His death was a tragedy, but his foresight in documenting everything transformed it into something that brought justice and potentially saved lives. That's his legacy now. Not the false narrative Rachel tried to create, but the truth he was brave enough to preserve, even knowing it might cost him everything. If there's anyone listening who's in a situation that feels wrong, who's being isolated or manipulated or threatened, please know that you're not crazy. Your concerns are valid. You deserve to be believed and supported. Reach out for help. Document what's happening. Trust your instincts. There are people who will believe you, who will fight alongside you. It might take time. It might be harder than you can imagine. But you are strong enough to survive this and to help others recognize the patterns you've identified. And if there's anyone listening who's lost someone in suspicious circumstances but been told to accept the official explanation, know that it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to trust your instincts about your loved one, to believe that you knew them better than investigators who spent a few hours on their case. You're not being paranoid or unable to accept reality. You're honoring your loved one by refusing to let their truth be buried with them. Keep asking questions. Keep pushing for answers. You might be the only one who can get them justice. To Daniel, wherever you are now, thank you for being the best big brother anyone could ask for. Thank you for teaching me to be brave, to think critically, to never give up even when things seem hopeless. Thank you for documenting what happened to you, for trusting me to find your evidence and use it to stop the person who hurt you. You saved lives even after death. You made sure Rachel couldn't hurt anyone else. That's the kind of man you were, always thinking about protecting others, even at cost to yourself. I miss you every single day. I miss your terrible jokes and your awful music taste and the way you'd listen to my problems without trying to fix them. I miss having you as my best friend, my protector, my person who understood me better than anyone else. But I promise to keep living the life you wanted for me. To be happy despite the grief. To use this experience to help others. To never let anyone silence me when I know something is wrong. That's how I honor your memory now. Not by dwelling in the past, but by building a future where other families don't have to experience what ours did. To anyone who's made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness to Daniel's truth, to my fight for justice, to all the families Rachel destroyed. We're survivors, all of us, carrying forward despite unbearable loss. And while the scars never fully fade, they remind us that we're strong enough to survive what tried to break us. That's what I want you to take from this story. Not the darkness of what happened, but the light of knowing that truth eventually surfaces, that justice is possible, that fighting back against impossible odds can succeed. You are stronger than you know. You are braver than you believe. And you are never as alone as you feel in your darkest moments. Trust yourself. Fight for truth. Honor your loved ones by refusing to let their stories be rewritten by those who hurt them. That's what Daniel taught me. And that's what I'm passing on to you.